Good morning, Tate. Can you hear me? Is everything good on the comm side?
It
Yes,
is,
sir.
Chairman.
Thank you. So it's 1 o'clock. This is Commissioner Palmer. I'm going to go ahead and get this started. I think we have all the commissioners. Let's call this meeting to order. Good afternoon. I'm EAC Commissioner Chairman Don Palmer. I want to welcome everyone to the EAC's meeting on the VVSG 2.0. This is our first VVSG focus meeting since our February 10 commissioner vote that moved to adopt VVSG 2.0. The American public and stakeholders need to know that we are on track for implementation of these new standards. So HAVA mandates that the EAC develop and maintain these requirements. However, today, through our discussion, it'll be evident that this effort requires the election community to work together to make VVSG 2.0 a reality. So despite the requirements being voluntary, at least 38 states use the standards, making the February 10th vote on advancing the next version of VVSG very important. The EAC, NIST, our labs and our boards have continued to move the process forward on parallel paths during the last several months. A lot of work has been done over the years to get us to this point. We've conducted public meetings and will continue to make significant progress on this effort. VVSG 2.0 represents a significant advancement in defining standards that will serve as the cornerstone of the next generation of voting systems. It lays the groundwork for 21st century voting systems that are desperately needed with improved cybersecurity, accessibility, auditability, and usability requirements. The EAC is committed to seeing this through completion and will highlight the importance and urgency to the manufacturers who join us today. We are working closely with NIST to ensure that NAVLAB accreditation is completed by the end of the year. In addition, we're working on an update to the VVSG 2.0 test assertions, scheduled to be complete in the coming weeks, that will include items like familiar methods for hardware testing. So I'm pleased that this meeting takes us on a different path from past discussions, which focused on the requirements, and today we can focus on steps forward to operationalize VVSG 2.0. With our first panel that consists of 9 manufacturers, it will last about 1 hour in duration. We'll focus on where the manufacturers are in terms of designing and building to VVSG 2.0 systems, the cost to implement those standards, and ensure that they are acquainted with the standards and are utilizing the mechanisms we have in place to seek clarification to avoid any delays in the process. You may hear some urgency from election officials or other stakeholders, and from me. VVSG 2.0 systems need to be designed and ready for testing as soon as practical, so election officials can plan now for 2024 and beyond. We all know there will be a cost, yet this is a necessary effort to modernize our election infrastructure. Hopefully, local, state, and federal decision makers and appropriators will see the absolute necessity to upgrade our election infrastructure and fund the next generation of voting systems. Our second panel will include a discussion with our accredited voting system test laboratories, or VISTLs. And finally, our third panel will have a discussion that focuses on VVSG 2.0 implementation from an election official perspective. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. And now I want to pass it on to Vice Chair Hicks for some opening remarks. Vice Chair Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good afternoon. I'm EAC Vice Chair Thomas Hicks. I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists today. As Chairman Palmer touched on, our second panel consists of EAC accredited voting system testing laboratories. The EAC Vistals play an integral role in the EAC testing and certification program. I'm eager to hear more about the Vistals' ongoing work and progress made to date to meet the demands of testing to the VVSG 2.0 standards. The EAC Vistals will be undergoing the required NIST NAVLab accreditation. Today, I hope to hear about their plans to gear up for VVSG 2.0 compliance and ultimately their readiness for this accreditation. We'll also cover in our discussion the required steps for their preparation and participation of testing and certifying VVSG 2.0 voting systems. I want to thank everyone who joined us here today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hicks. Commissioner McCormick.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Moving VVSG 2.0 Forward meeting. The panelists today represent three critical perspectives to ensure the success of progress being made on the implementation of VVSG 2.0. We've come a long way, and I want to continue to ensure we are moving forward with operationalizing the VVSG 2.0. We couldn't have made it this far without the assistance from our primary stakeholders, election officials. For that reason, I would like to highlight our third panel and welcome Michelle Tassinari, President of the National Association of State Election Directors, and Tim Mattice, Executive Director for the National Association of Election Officials, otherwise known as Election Center. I'm interested in hearing an election official perspective on the implementation of VVSG 2.0. Our panelists will provide both their individual experiences, but also provide a national perspective regarding the demand, urgency, and challenges that election officials are facing as they make plans for the procurement of new VVSG compliant systems. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'm excited to hear from all of you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hovland, do you have some opening comments?
Thank you, Chairman Palmer. As you've heard from my colleagues, the formal adoption of the VVSG 2.0 February 10th marks a momentous achievement in completing the first segment of a multi-year process by establishing critical benchmarks for developing, testing, and certifying next-generation voting systems throughout the United States. The VVSG 2.0 leverages adherence to measurable technical requirements that will substantially enhance overall voting system security, accessibility, and usability, while also increasing voter confidence. While the production and deployment of these new systems are critical, operationalizing VVSG 2.0 doesn't come without challenges. Our voters do not benefit from this achievement if these systems do not get built, procured, and used in polling places. We've heard from manufacturers in a previous hearing that the cost of the systems will inevitably increase with these new standards. As the EAC is responsible to distribute federal grant funding to the states, I want to highlight the need for a funding source allocated to election officials to assist with the practical implementation framework that recognizes the investment manufacturers are making to build these systems. It's done with confidence that election officials have the funding to procure these systems in a timely manner. The EAC has regularly heard from election officials about the need for a consistent funding stream that allows for strategic long-range planning. The planning is critical. However, it's not possible without a consistent annual funding stream allowing for budgeting complex projects over multiple years rather than receiving an inconsistent funds. Funding for election system cyclical replacements is not just crucial to the system, but includes a wide range of investments from training to cybersecurity to recruiting critical personnel and executing long-term contracts that align with long-term strategic plans. Consistent funding is critical to preserve trust and confidence in our democracy. And I just want to highlight how important that is as we continue to move forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. So thank you for those remarks, commissioners. I'd like to introduce our first group of panelists for today's meeting to discuss the development of voting system equipment for VVSG 2.0, the challenges in the development process, the timelines in the VVSG lifecycle policy. So I'm pleased to announce the following representatives from the various voting system manufacturers across the country. Start with Nicholas Vignali, who's technical representative of Avante. Russ Dawson, Federal Certification Program Manager from Clear Ballot. Tim Hallett, Vice President of Certification ES&S. Nick Ikonomakis, Vice President of Engineering, Dominion Voting Systems. Pam Geppert, Senior Director of Product Management and Certification, Hart InterCivic. Bernie Hirsch, the Chief Information Officer of Microvote. Ed Smith, the Director of Global Services and Certifications, Smartmatic. McDermott Coots, Chief Software Architect and Director of Software Development, Unison. And Benedita, Executive Director of VotingWorks. I believe I've got them all. Welcome to this hearing. I appreciate you joining us today for this panel. I know the commissioners and I have some questions. I'm going to take the prerogative and start off with the first question. Generally, as you're aware, we have a critical need for VVSG 2.0 systems into production to meet the new accessibility, security, and usability standards adopted in February. So we've heard that timeline was about 24 plus months to accomplish that. Are you still on track with that timeline? And we can start generally from where we started. Please keep your answers very brief, either yes or no or brief, because we've got limited time. So I'll start with Nicholas, if we just go right down the road, right down the line of manufacturers. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. So yes, we are on track with that given timeline here at Avante.
Thank you. Mr. Dawson.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel. Yeah, 24-month horizon is definitely part of the Clear Ballot plan.
Great. Mr. Hallett.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Palmer, and all the other commissioners for allowing us the opportunity to be a part of this panel. We really appreciate it. With respect to the timeline, as you know, the 2.0 standards are a significant overhaul to the 1.0 and 1.1 standards, which is good. Obviously, that bolsters the security of equipment and it also enhances voter confidence. ES&S has started the development process for the 2.0 system. And as set forth in the FAQ document that was recently published by 6 voting system manufacturers, we anticipate that applications for 2.0 systems will be submitted sometime after the 2024 general elections.
Thank you. Mr. Ikonomakis.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners. Yeah, Dominion Voting Systems is on track to that timeline.
Great. Pam Geppert.
Yes, thank you. HART is aggressively pursuing the VVSG 2.0 compliant products and is committed to providing a system as quickly as possible. As mentioned just now, the manufacturer's FAQ on the VVSG 2.0 states that it's likely for full VVSG 2.0 systems to be submitted for testing soon after the 2024 general elections. There still remains some uncertainty in some of the VVSG 2.0 requirements and some lack of clarity around the VSTL's accreditation schedule that could lead to delays in that. But we will rely on ongoing EAC guidance and clarifications to ensure that manufacturers continue to be supported throughout this process.
Mr. Hirsch, welcome.
Was that for me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, we are on schedule, but we are also signatory to the FAQ, and we also agree that 2024 is a reasonable projection for us to be able to apply for a certification. We're still waiting, of course, for test assertions and clarification on some of these requirements. So, but yeah, we're definitely moving ahead with a 2.0 system.
Mr. Ed Smith. Are we missing Mr. Smith, or did I miss something?
His volume is not on.
I'm sorry, I was muted and had difficulty unmuting. Thank you,
Sorry.
Chairman, Commissioners, and Executive Director Harrington. So Smartmatic is diligently and enthusiastically working on the new standard. I personally lead several hours a week of learnings associated to it, and we are moving as quickly as possible. We also reflect the FAQ that's been mentioned by a few of my industry colleagues and the remarks made at NAS. That we expect applications in the 24-25 timeframe.
Thank you. McDermott Coots?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we are also, it's almost a ditto. We are signatory to the FAQ. We are also diligently looking at this. We are trying to get here as quickly as possible, but again, the responses to some of the RFIs that we're writing are going to have an impact on overall design and complexity of the system, and therefore the timeline.
Well, thank you. I think, Mr. Dita, I'm sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners. We're working as fast as we can on the VVSG2 implementation plan. And we plan to submit a system for initial testing in mid-2022. This makes a couple of assumptions that the test assertions can be finished in time for the end of the year. But we are aggressively moving on that, and that is when we intend to submit a system for initial testing. And we're very, very thankful for the prompt responses we received from ESC staff to all of our questions so far.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for answering that question. I think it's vital on clarity. There's some sense of clarity, and that's one reason we wanted to ask that question and talk about this issue. As the more clarity we have, the better election officials can plan and plan for a future 2.0 system to replace current systems. I know I've gone over my allotted time, so I'm going to turn it over to Vice Chair Hicks. I know that you probably have some questions as well for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to ask a two-part question with a yes and no, and basically go back up in reverse order. We here at the EAC are working diligently to enhance the testing assertions, adopt a life cycle policy, update the manuals as needed, and obtain lab accreditation by the end of this calendar year. Have you performed the due diligence in reviewing and understanding the requirements, and where are you, and where you have questions, have you submitted an RFI to the EAC to obtain clarification? And we can start with Mr. Ben Adida.
Thank you, Commissioner. So yes, we have been working with EAC staff and asking questions along the way, and EAC staff have been really fantastic in answering all of our questions promptly. One thing that we could benefit from is more transparency and more opportunity for iteration around the development of the testing assertions. At this time, a number of the testing assertions are still not published. And I know the schedule is to finalize them by end of the year. It would be great if we could have a chance to review drafts and provide feedback before that happens. And Commissioner, did you also ask about the life cycle policy, or was that part of that, or is that a separate question?
No, that was part of it. It was basically if you had a chance to review it.
Yeah, we did have a chance to review it. Thank you for thinking carefully about that life cycle policy. We think it's really, really important. We want to highlight that we're one of a couple of vendors that are not that are in a particular position where we don't have a system certified on prior versions of VVSG. And I do want to highlight that with 95% of the market controlled by long-established vendors who have the ability to continue to certify systems under VVSG 1.0, if the lifecycle policy continues to allow that, I'm worried that VVSG 2 will not have the impact that it could have if many vendors are not required to adopt it. And so as this debate continues on the lifecycle policy, we want to suggest paying close attention to how the current lifecycle policy is being used and one could say stretched. I want to call out one particular example And that in January of this year, which is almost a year after VVSG 2 was adopted, a major vendor has submitted a brand new central scanner, complete with a new product name and significant new features for certification to the EAC under VVSG 1.0. And as far as we know, the certification is ongoing. In our opinion, as you revise the lifecycle policy, we don't think this should be allowed. If it is allowed, then the lifecycle policy might become meaningless, and long-established vendors may continue to release entirely new systems under the 16-year-old VVSG 1 simply by performing the update one component at a time. We think this would significantly hamper the adoption of VVSG 2 and significantly reduce real competition and innovation in the marketplace. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the time, Commissioner.
Thank you. McDermott?
Yeah, so we are working through the VVSG. My entire staff has actually been reading it, so everybody gets it. And we are going to be submitting a large stack of RFIs to the EAC in fairly short order. So please be looking out for that, and I know that everybody will respond quickly. As far as the life cycle is concerned, I appreciate that a lot of thought has got into it. There's never been an easy answer to life cycle. No matter how we look at it, it's going to cause problems. So we'll have to see how that one turns out, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Ed Smith?
Thank you, Commissioner. So we continue also to diligently review the new VVSG at a very detailed level. As I mentioned above, several hours a week of learnings with the various divisions within Smartmatic. We have provided RFIs and are likely to provide several more as we continue to move our way through VVSG and seek a compliant system. Right now, the test assertions actually have very little clarifying content. Many of them simply restate what's in VVSG, and big chunks are missing, such as the list of hardware testing, electromechanical hardware testing that's going to be required under the new VVSG. So we look forward to seeing that as lack of completed test assertions actually are hampering our efforts to finalize an architecture and product requirements documents. As regards the life cycle policy, sunsetting, as it's more colloquially called, has consumed quite a lot of time in my engineering career. Especially when I was in OEM manufacturing of telecommunications equipment. It's not easy. I'm glad that the EAC is taking it on. As McDermott said, there's probably no right answer, maybe even not a best answer, but I'm glad you guys are taking it on. And as Mr. Dita said, having it be a fairly stern life cycle policy relative to submittal of systems to the older VVSGs, I think is to everyone's advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. Bernie?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Well, I'll start with the life cycle policy. I think it's important that, especially for those jurisdictions that have just recently acquired equipment, that they be supported fully for the life of the equipment. And we're required to say that our equipment is going to last at least 10 years, our system, in order to be certified. And I don't think it would be fair to those jurisdictions to tell them that the equipment that they've just purchased or just upgraded, isn't going to be supported for that length of time. I think it should be something that's more controlled by the market. I do believe that many jurisdictions, especially if there's funding available, will just elect to go to the latest and greatest, and that's fine. But I think it should be something that's left up to the individual states or the individual jurisdictions to make that determination. What was the other part of your question, just to remind me? Oh, the RFIs.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, we were the first company to be certified under the 1.0 system. And so we were sort of on the cutting edge there of technology at that time. And I did request for interpretations, and it was over disagreements that we would have with the lab that was testing our actual system during a test campaign. Normally, I think, especially having looked at the VVSG and helped to draft that, I think it's fairly clear from my standpoint what the intent is. And I think unless we were to have a disagreement with the lab over the interpretation, we most likely wouldn't submit a request for interpretation unless we disagreed with them over a particular issue. We might at some point request a clarification, which is not the same thing. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Pam?
Yes, thank you. HART has thoroughly reviewed the VVSG 2.0 standards, and we have submitted 18 requests for clarifications to the EAC. Of those, 2 have resulted in formal RFI responses. We performed very thorough due diligence to date, and we look forward to an ongoing clarification feedback process with the EAC.
Thank you. Nick?
Yes, thank you. Like my counterparts, we are continuously reviewing the requirements and are awaiting the enhancements to the test assertions to assist in our understanding of them. We, to date, we have not found any additional areas that require RFIs, but we feel that with the updates to the test assertions, we will have some areas of questions and requests for clarifications.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, thank you. With respect to the 2.0 standards, once those were adopted and all the comments were adjudicated, which we really appreciate the time and effort spent in going through all the comments submitted. I know there was over 1,000 comments, and those were very helpful that the EAC took the time to go through all those and clarify some of the requirements. So thank you for that. As far as ES&S goes, we put together a cross-functional team where we have reviewed all the 2.0 requirements, identified those that we need, identify those that we need to develop to, and then also identified a bucket that we have questions for. So that work has been completed here at ES&S, and we now are in the process of summarizing all our questions, and we'll be submitting those to the EAC through the RFI process. With respect to the product lifestyle policy, I think we just need to make sure that for those, similar to what Bernie said, to those jurisdictions that recently purchased equipment, we need to make sure that they have the ability to continue to use those systems for the life of the systems, and that manufacturers can, support and modify those to the current standards while we transition to the VVSG 2.0. So we look forward to working with the EAC on developing that lifestyle policy to the extent we can. That's, satisfactory to all parties. Thank you.
Russ?
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, I'd like to echo what Tim and Bernie said concerning the complications of the life cycle policy, and specifically a near-term sunset on the ability to offer modifications to fielded VVSG 1.0 systems. As I think everyone would agree, the operational life of a voting system is a minimum of 10 years, sometimes 15, and in the past approaching 20 in some edge cases. I also fear that if there is a near-term sunset of the ability to offer modifications on these recently fielded systems, there could be states that might choose to opt out of a requirement for an EAC certified system, which might end up diluting the value and the power of an EAC system, regardless of what voting system guidelines those systems were certified to. In terms of VVSG 2.0, we also did a comprehensive cross-functional team evaluation of those guidelines. And we also appreciate the EAC submitting the red line versions along with the clean versions once VVSG 2.0 was adopted. That was extremely helpful. So again, we thank you for that. We have not submitted any RFIs yet. I'm certain that we will. And the last thing is we echo the need for some more fully fleshed out test assertions. Those are my comments today.
Thank you. And Nicholas?
Thank you, Commissioner. So we have reviewed the requirements of VVSG 2.0. We haven't sent out an RFI yet, but we most likely will in the next 30 to 60 days. in regards to the sections on access control and especially the multi-factor authentication. We do a lot of business with our biometric user verification, so we'd like to clarify a few points there. So we will be reaching out in the next month or so with an RFI.
Thank you all. Chairman, I think Commissioner McCormick is up next.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Hicks. My question for the panel is, do you have any plans to submit systems for testing components to VVSG 2.0 sooner than the timeframes you indicated? You'll have a fully compliant 2.0 system ready for certification. And let's start with Mr. Vignali.
Thank you, Commissioner. So yes, we will be submitting early based on our current progress. Timeline isn't set in stone, but we do plan on submitting earlier than our original timeline, I'd say.
Great, thank you. Mr. Dawson?
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, our short answer is we do not have any plans for accelerated component testing to VVSG 2.0, but those plans could change and they are under active consideration at Clear Ballot.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Hallett?
Yes, thank you. To the extent we're able to include VVSG 2.0 components in our upcoming releases, we will. So we have every intention of doing that. We understand that it may ultimately be certified to the 1.0 standards, but to the extent we can include them, we will. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ikonomakis?
Yes, thank you. If this is something we're continuing to evaluate going forward, but we have not committed to submitting something earlier than the full system.
Thank you. Ms. Gepper?
So I think you're asking about testing individual system components to the new VVSG 2.0 standard that would result in a blended system with VVSG 1.0 and 2.0 components. We are interested in that idea, but it is difficult to answer the question intelligently without more specific guidance from the EAC about how this type of program would work. We need to have more and further clarification in the program manual and directions to the VSTLs about how this testing and certification program would work.
Thank you for that. Mr. Hirsch?
We always welcome more clarification from the EAC. We do have plans to modify our 1.0 system with a 2.0 component within the next year.
Great, thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. Yes, Smartmatic is likely to take advantage of a component certification program.
Excellent. Mr. Coots?
Yes, Unison is basically going to be taking the 2.0 requirements as part of all future development. So where we can incorporate, we shall, and where we can certify a component to the full 2.0, we shall do that.
Good, thank you. Mr. Adidas?
Thank you, Commissioner. We would love to submit a component of a complete voting system for VVSG 2 certification. Unfortunately, under the existing lifecycle policy for vendors created after 2015, the EAC has not provided a path for us to do so yet, but we would be one of the first in lines, including common data format input and outputs for those components if we were provided a path to do so. We'd be very excited about that.
Well, thank you for that input. Thank you to all the panelists for answering the question. Commissioner Hovland?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. In my introductory remarks, I talked about sort of costs and budgeting around election systems. Wanted to talk, and again, I recognize with this question, and I'm just going to get down the line again, but I recognize that a lot of you are early in the process, but I think it's important for election officials, for appropriators, whether at the state, local, or federal level, to have a sense of where you see the future of voting system costs. And so can you talk a little bit about, again, broad brush strokes, how you see the costs of 2.0 systems comparing to current systems, and then just again, for people's planning, I've also heard a decent amount recently about some of maybe some newer implemented requirements at the state level that involve additional testing. Can you talk about how that could impact the costs of equipment I'll start down the line again with Mr. Vignali. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Avante currently doesn't see any significant price increase, but as we move through the certification process, we'll be able to provide more insight on that matter.
Thank you, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you, Commissioner. You know, one thing that I think bears mentioning is that we have a very finite market, which means we can't spread our development and manufacturing and assembly costs and go capture a bigger market. So with that said, we're always going to have challenges with minimizing cost of goods sold, and then of course passing along those savings into our customers in terms of the end user price. In terms of state level certifications, there's some redundancy out there that does cause price increases. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot of states that don't require EAC certified systems, yet they want all of the artifacts and processes that the EAC certification process requires. And then oftentimes there's a layer of state level testing where we need to go in again, and it's not just a product demonstration, you know, at a state capitol somewhere. It's very involved. There's redundant documentation, and while we understand that each state has its idiosyncrasies in terms of how they administer elections, differences in statutes and whatnot, there is a level of redundancy in more than a few states that does result in price increases for voting systems. I've said enough. I know we're under time constraints, so thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, again, we hear consistently about the challenges around funding and the need for it. And obviously the equipment is one of the largest costs in election administration. So it's important to hear that and recognize where we can have efficiencies. So thank you for those comments. Mr. Hallett.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. You know, as you stated, it's pretty early in the development process here at ES&S. So we really don't fully know the impact of the 2.0 standards on our systems at this time. I think, you know, that information will probably be more readily available once all the RFIs have been completed. And then, you know, once we're able to kind of understand the sourcing and procuring of component parts and what those prices are going to be. So I think as we get farther down the line, we'll have a better grasp on the cost of the voting systems. So hopefully we can provide a little more clarity at that time. With respect to state testing, you know, from my perspective, we're seeing a lot more states having additional testing requirements, whether it's security related or other, which is a good thing. Obviously, anytime you can have additional testing, which ensures the security of the voting system, that's a good thing. You know, unfortunately, that testing comes with a cost, and, you know, manufacturers are asked to bear a lot of those costs of that additional testing. So we're gathering that information, and once we have, you know, some more information on our 2.0 standard system and how those testings will affect it, I think we'll have a better feel for the costs and if those will have to be included in our systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ikonomakis.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to say ditto to Tim's comments. As mentioned in this panel, there's more work to be done in the test assertions lifecycle policy, testing certification program manual updates. Additional testing and disclosures for compliance and security are worthy new elements, but they'll add to system costs. And we won't know exact figures and know what this is going to be until these details are set forth and finalized. And so we won't know whether the costs will go up or down. And here at Dominion, we strive to provide election value and solutions to our customers while complying with all federal and state requirements, and continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Geppert.
Thank you. There is certainly some risk that hardware changes required by VVSG 2.0 can drive cost increases to voting systems, but it's still too early in the process to provide a definitive answer. As to your second question, as state level regulatory requirements and testing protocols are increased, it is possible that higher fees may ultimately occur.
Thank you. Mr. Hirsch.
We haven't found any great solutions to the funding issue as everyone else has. And I agree that it's way too early for us to know what our pricing is going to be for a product that's just under design and development right now. You know, naturally, we're relying on our current customer base and cash flow jurisdictions that are currently using our system, which, you know, we have quite a number of those. And that's the money that it's a private company. You know, Microvote is a private company, and we don't have access to, you know, military funds or anything like that, like all the other private companies. And so we fund our own development and design and work. I think all of us would say that, you know, some of the large vendors, suppliers that we use, we're like a little tiny blip on their radar. We don't buy like thousands and thousands of laptops at a time, as an example. And so we are pretty much just subject to market forces when it comes to our pricing. Our goal is always to try and maintain, you know, a high quality system, but we realize that jurisdictions can't afford 2 and 3 and 4 times the cost of what they're spending now. So as much as we can, whenever we're putting out our requests for quotes from our suppliers to develop new equipment for us, we're including in that, here's really what we think, you know, we need to stay under this price, because we don't want to offer a product that's just like too expensive for anybody to afford. So it's one of our top. I know when the requirements were written, they really weren't necessarily considering cost as a primary issue. It's our elections after all, but it is an issue, and, you know, it is always an issue. And so that's my answer.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And when you look, as Mr. Hirsch implied, at supply chains across the globe right now, prices are increasing, lead times are increasing, the delivery and implementation is getting tougher because of instability in the supply chain globally. So that combined with the enhanced requirements on hardware, software, and processes in VVSG 2.0 at least provide a strong directional indicator that prices for systems are going to go up. And I believe that they will go up. By how much, as my colleagues say, is a little difficult to say at this time. And as regards state requirements, you know, we at Smartmatic do everything we can to focus, properly allocate, and certainly minimize our overheads. But state certification cost is an overhead. The states are very disjointed in their certification. If you look across the states and try and make a fabric from it, you'll find it's very disjointed and not at all easy, in fact, impossible in many cases to sew together and combine to ultimately reduce state certification costs. So where states do put into place additional, and certainly if those additional test requirements carry a significant cost, you are going to see customers in that state bearing a higher cost, and some of it, depending on the nature of the test and product requirements, may even ripple out across the rest of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coots.
Yes, thank you. So as far as pricing is concerned, again, I echo what Mr. Smith said. The supply chains are just making things more difficult. They're not going to be getting better from what we're seeing within the 24-month window that we're looking at. It's just going to get worse. As far as the cost, well, from the states, we've noticed that the straight cost from the states has gone up recently. That's already having an impact, and that's going to continue to get more to become more complicated and more expensive. One of the things that I keep running into is, again, security testing is good, but security testing after you've gone through certification is not good. Those resources are much better spent upfront during design, during development, to make sure you got it taken care of there.
Thank you, Mr. Adida.
Thank you, Commissioner. So This is the first time we're certifying a system to the VVSG, so I can't give a comparison to the past, but we can highlight one key part of VVSG that we believe will be particularly costly to implement. Our approach in implementing systems is to use commercial off-the-shelf hardware, which is how we try to reduce costs and improve reliability and work with a supply chain that's established outside of the voting systems and thus ideally somewhat more reliable, but the comments from my colleagues still do apply there. So the one requirement is 6.2-A, the accessibility requirement that was also part of VVSG 1.1, and that was a significant challenge in VVSG 1.1. This is the requirement where voters who do not have the use of their hands must be able to submit and cast a ballot independently and secretly. And there's two aspects that one should understand about this requirement. And I want to reaffirm our commitment at Voting Works to accessibility. We think it's critically important, and at the same time acknowledge the cost of this particular requirement and its wording. So to our knowledge, the requirement is not possible to implement with existing COTS hardware, which means that we would have to go to custom electromechanics, and that would significantly increase the cost of the equipment. That will significantly increase the cost of the equipment. Furthermore, we have heard that the one design approach that is likely to be the solution to this requirement, that one existing manufacturer holds a patent on that approach, however questionable that patent may be, that is something that could significantly increase the cost for other manufacturers if they are forced to find awkward workarounds or pay a licensing fee. And so I just want to highlight those two things about where I think the VVSG2 requirements may be costly.
Thank you all for your answers there, particularly because this is an evolving situation, and it seems like there could be more information as we get farther down the road. Please keep us informed. It's critical. As if this isn't clear, we are looking ahead for any roadblocks related to the VVSG 2.0 to its full implementation. And as we regularly hear from members of Congress, our oversight committees, election officials, who are planning for this, who are looking at budgeting or providing federal grant money, if they need an accurate picture of what the costs are going to look like to be able to be responsive and to be able to ensure that the 2.0 is a success. So thank you, and I'll turn it back to Chairman Palmer.
Thank you, Commissioner Hublin. We have some more time, so I'm going to ask a couple of general questions, maybe just one because of time. I guess going back to the original question, we talked about the timing of VVSG 2.0 systems being available. There was some reference to the Sector Coordinating Council document and timing in 2024, 2025. I guess one of my concerns is, and you guys can assuage my concerns, is some states are looking for 2.0 systems immediately. Some localities are looking for it immediately. Some are more than happy to wait till 2024, 2025 to acquire new systems. But because of the timing of elections, there are certain windows that we have to work within. And so I'd like to know why there would be a delay after 2024 for testing. We had designed and bring systems in for testing while the election officials are doing their work. I know you guys support them in the field as well. But I'm just concerned that if we wait till 2024, 2025, we are then setting ourselves up for more concerns with windows that there can be RFPs and acquisitions. And so can you talk about what could incentivize the process for you to get systems available for testing, 2022 to 2024 with states, most states will then want to bring them in after the general election in 2024. Could anyone who wants to, if you want to answer that question, please go ahead. Oh, don't make me call on you now. Well, I'm going to ask ES&S to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, the new requirements have a lot to them. So it just takes time to develop to it. So, we're going to move as quickly as we can, but quite frankly, the time for us to develop it with all our systems and configurations, we are looking at, post 2024. And to the extent we can get that done sooner, obviously we will work towards that. But realistically, we just want to set expectations that, developing these requirements, at least from our perspective, is going to take some time.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I agree. There's not really it's not about incentivizing. It's just, this is how long it takes to do it properly, especially since the VVSG does impose, as Mr. Adida has pointed out, some fairly significant physical constraints. And those are hard to design to, and to make everything work. So it's just, that's kind of what it takes.
Mr. Chair, Ed Smith here. We are certainly incented by market forces and competitive forces. We're all rather fierce competitors on this call. So it's not so much a matter of incentive, but to build on Mr. Kutz's comment, not only are there physical natures, hardware and software, there's also significant and well-placed business process enhanced requirements, particularly around the user experience and user-centered design that alongside the hardware, software, and documentation requirements take some time to assimilate and ultimately manifest as a system.
Well, since we have 10 minutes left, I'm going to pass it on to my other commissioners. I do have one more question, but I'll see if it's asked in the following questions. Vice Chair Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a really quick question in terms of some of the things that we've been hearing about in this pandemic is a lack of supply chain and how things are being back ordered or completely eliminated because of lack of parts and other issues. As we look at 2022 and beyond, are you facing supply chain issues? Are you developing workarounds to that? And how are you ensuring that you can meet demand, I guess, is the question that I have. Anyone can answer that.
Commissioner Hicks, this is Bernie. So, some of our parts that we were ordering on a 30 to 60 day lead time are now on a 1 year lead time. And it's not just that supplier's suppliers have told them, a certain, and it only takes one small little thing to kind of gum up the whole works. And it's mostly due to COVID, the pandemic. But keep in mind that, some of these changes, the layers of certification and approvals that we have to go through and testing, it just, it's breathtaking. I don't think people have a full understanding of how onerous that is. And so to just sort of go out and find another source for a product that you've finely tuned and designed and developed and manufactured, and they say, guess what, this particular part now is, 6 months out on it. It's 6 months out on it, and it doesn't make sense to, in the next 3 months, to try and find some other replacement part for that, because then we just have to go back through the whole process again. And then we have this sort of sunset thing hanging on top of us as well that could happen. And so that's why it's really important to continue supporting what we have going on right now with our 1.0 systems. That's funding our efforts to a 2.0 system. And we don't have, so, maybe one mechanism that would help is if Congress considered funding manufacturers more upfront. Right now, they're funding our customers to buy a finished product. But the real, where the time is happening is in the development and the production and the testing. That's where, we don't make $1 on any of this until we have a finished product. And so, that's the real hang up here.
And one thing to keep in mind as we're looking at supply chain issues, as was pointed out earlier, we don't really show up on big manufacturers' radar. And so if they get a big order from somebody else, say a car manufacturer, everything that might have come to us is all going to go to them. We're not going to have our needs are not going to be taken into account. So, if Congress prioritize us, maybe that would make a difference, but I don't know.
Thank you. If any other commissioner wants to ask a question in the last few minutes.
Sure, I'd like to ask a question. The timeframes that you've been given us, 2024 to 2025, does that include the sales and procurement of these systems? Or is it just the technical design and build of the system?
Commissioner, I'll answer that a little bit. This is another example of the idiosyncrasies between states. I know there are states out there that prohibit the sale and marketing of a system that is not EAC certified and/or certified in that state. They're in the minority, but that is another complication that the manufacturers community faces when trying to market and sell a system that is currently under development.
Anybody else want to address that? The marketing and procurement part, if that's included in the timeline of getting these systems out there? Okay, Commissioner Huffland, do you have anything you want to add?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. I do want to be mindful of our other panels, so ensure that we have enough time for that. Chairman Palmer, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. I do have one more question, and we have a couple of minutes, so a couple can chime in. It's actually following up on Commissioner Hovland's question. Do you see any, you guys have talked a little bit about state certification processes and state requirements. Is there any way that the EAC, in your opinion, could partner with or make the process more efficient and less duplicative? Are there some high-level things that we should look at? Just your thoughts.
There was an effort that was going on early on under Jessica Myers, where they were trying to put together the state requirements so that they could be lumped into the federal certification process. I don't know what happened to that document and process, but that would have been a start.
Mr. Chair, Ed Smith here again. I'm sure there are. I didn't come prepared to talk about that question. What can the EAC do? But I will say that I think, from my personal experience, that the bulk of the issue lies at the states. You have the states with the longest and costliest programs have those written into statute, and thus they're not changeable by action from the EAC. That's going to have to be a state legislative change to end the duplication and essentially a complete duplication with the federal campaigns at those states. And that's true even in states with a less time-consuming process. There are pieces of their state certification process written into statute. Primarily, it's in rules and regulations. So it's going to have to come up from the states.
Well, thank you. Is there anybody else who had a comment on that before we move on?
Commissioner, this is Bernie. So sometimes we, in an effort to meet a state requirement, a new law that's being implemented, we move forward with a modification to our system and have the state do that evaluation. And then after the fact, the EAC comes in and evaluates it. If there's any way the EAC could, I don't know, somehow cut down the time up front for a test campaign or allow testing to happen in advance to be valid, just some kind of mechanism so that the timing could be faster up front for the EAC to let us go ahead and get a change into a system. Because some of the states actually are slower, but some are much faster than the way the EAC operates. Also, when we go for state certification, they have what they call a mapping process, where they'll map a federal requirement into a state requirement that they have. And that always doesn't sort of map one-to-one. You know, there might be some small variations there. If there's a way that the EAC could come up with some guidance for various states on how their requirements map into the state requirements, that might cut down on the time to market, you know. Another suggestion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hirsch, and thank you for those that brought that issue up. I think we'll explore it a little bit. I want to thank everyone on panel 1 for this discussion about the VVSG 2.0 and the voting system design and testing in the future. With this, I want to thank you, and we're going to go and move to panel 2, which will be discussing the voting system test labs. Vice Chair Hicks, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. In addition to hearing from voting system manufacturers, the EAC also wanted to hear from voting system test labs, or VSTLs, to join today's event. For this panel, we want to discuss lab preparation and potential challenges for testing against VVSG 2.0. So joining this panel are Jack Cobb, Laboratory Director for Pro V&V, and Mike Santos, Senior Test Manager for SLI. Thank you both for joining us. And I will start with the questions right off the bat. Make sure that everyone's joined. I see you both. How are you prepared to add VVSG to the current accreditation? And what plans are you making to ensure you have the adequate skill set of your personnel and to get your operation up to speed to meet the demands of 2.0 accreditation? Mike, if you want to start off.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner Hicks. How prepared are we to add VVSG 2.0 to our current accreditation? The first part of the question. We are reviewing and updating our internal standard lab procedures, our SLPs, and our test methods, which is well underway. We anticipate having those complete and ready for accreditation by November 1st, 2021, so in the next couple of months. We expect to have some additional accreditation updates once we receive NVLAPS updates to Handbook 15022, but anticipate that to be minimal. As far as the question for what plans are you making to ensure you have adequate skill sets of your personnel and to get the operation up to speed to meet the demands of VVSG 2.0 accreditation, our internal test methods discreetly provide an analysis for what specific skill set is needed to perform competent analysis and testing of the requirements, including in each particular test method. To date, reviews and analysis of VVSG 2.0 requirements indicate adequate skill sets on our team. If any deficiencies are noted between now and November 1st, they will be addressed either by training or acquiring whatever's needed. So we feel like we're in pretty good shape right now.
Thank you. Jack?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had the same problem Ed had. Currently, we've taken the principles and incorporated those into our processes and procedures. We're still in a draft format for the test assertions. As far as I know, there's not one published. So that will be more down in the weeds of the program. The actual, which mill standard are we going to use for hardware, and we're going to use FCC A or we're going to use FCC B. Those things are going to dictate a lot of the day-to-day work. But the overarching 15 principles have already been incorporated, and I believe we had a discussion back in May time period, that we would be able to meet about the same time period that Mike's talking about, November, before December, before the end of December, we would be ready if we could get some published test assertions and incorporate those as we're going. And as for the skill sets that are required, from what we've seen thus far, we have adequate skill sets already currently on staff. But of course, if something was to arise, we would either go through training, certifications, or maybe even a new hire if needed. But currently, we don't see that need.
Thank you both. Commissioner McCormick?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to both of our panelists today. What, if any, roadblocks are there to you becoming accredited and to begin testing within the time frame? Mr. Cobb?
Yes, the major roadblock right now is that we're neither one accredited to test to that specific standard. And that process starts with us applying to NIST to get an audit. And then we would also have to apply to the AC for an audit. And then we would have to incorporate everything that's published about the standards to then get an accreditation for both of those. Now, our NIST accreditation allows us to test to any published standard. The difference is with the test assertions, we don't know if we're going to do enough, too much, or to what level we're going to do the testing. So if someone came to us and wanted to contract to test to 2.0, even though we don't have an accreditation for it, we could test to that like we do customer requirements or other requirements. It can be done. Now, whether the EAC accepts that work later on or even during, that we don't know what level we should be doing. We're doing our best, what we think is best, and may not be agreeable to the Election Assistance Commission.
Okay, Mr. Santos?
We do not anticipate any roadblocks at this time. We feel like by November 1st, we'll be ready to answer any questions that manufacturers might have with regard to any of the VVSG 2.0 requirements. And we're, prepared to work through anything that we discover with the EAC to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But, other than the actual accreditation itself and the timelines for NVLab to perform those audits to accredit us, we feel like we're in pretty good shape at this time.
Thank you. Commissioner Hovland?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. I was wondering, so obviously you had a little bit of time now with the requirements and Mr. Cobb, you mentioned the draft assertions. Looking at both of those, do you see any major testing challenges that you've identified for your review? Anything that would, add significantly to timelines? Mr. Santos, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you. With regards to VVSG 2.0 and the test assertions, from what we've seen so far, we don't really see anything that causes any concern as far as a major testing challenge. A couple things that are within the program that we have identified. Ideally, we would like to see the EAC provide and maintain a library of all reference documents, including everything in Appendix C references. It's kind of talking to what Jack mentioned just a couple minutes ago. This would provide a consistency that everybody in the program is referencing the same documents and the same versions of those documents. I think we saw some stuff, early on in the program, early 2008, 9, and 10, where at times I think people were a little disjointed with the right reference. So I think that would help quite a bit. A second thing, it would add consistency to the program if the EAC maintained a known vulnerability database that everyone in the program could reference. Currently within the program, it's up to each VSTL to maintain their own known vulnerability database. So, it's unclear as to the consistency of reviews and implementations with regard to that. So I think that would be really beneficial to the program. VVSG 2.0 doesn't seem to clearly state that all functionality within a voting system is to be addressed within an EAC certification project, including state-specific features, as well as any other feature not directly covered by a VVSG 2.0 requirement. And this was something in VVSG 1.0. There were 3 requirements that kind of made reference to that. 2.0 has one requirement that touches on it, but it's not, doesn't seem like it's explicitly clear. So maybe with regard to 2.0, that would be something to kind of look at being a little bit more explicitly called out. As VVSG 2.0 has not yet been verified by an actual certification project, we would anticipate that there'll be some challenges that arise due to requirement implementation by manufacturers and will need to be addressed by one or more RFIs. But at this stage, we haven't identified any major challenges from a testing perspective. So that's what I have.
Thank you for that. Mr. Cobb, would you add anything to that?
No, I'm on board with what Mike's saying. There's not a lot of testing specific changes, but we're going to have to get what the specific levels or degree of the testing that we're going to have to do ironed out. And that's sort of what Mike was talking about is that we can read it on paper, but when you go to implement it and actually see what it actually, when you look at the words and the words actually say a specific thing, but you don't know exactly what the specific thing is, you might have some confusion. That happens though with every standard we've implemented. We have you have a learning period and a learning curve. The first one that goes through always takes longer. I think Bernie mentioned something about that. It takes a while for everybody to get on the same page and to interpret everything in the correct manner.
Thank you. Chairman Palmer.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. I guess my question is sort of this may bleed over into the previous question. And, you know, there were some delays and there were some kinks that were worked out when 1.0 was implemented. And, you know, you hear those same concerns from election officials around the testing and certification, future testing and certification for 2.0 systems. Now, so we're hopeful to have processes in place here to sort of avoid that. And obviously we want to work with you to avoid that. I know some of it's just, it's on the manufacturer to come in prepared, but is there an estimate that you have on that process of ways to make that more efficient? And what will be some of the financial burden for testing 2.0 if you, compared to 1.0, as you sit here today?
I'll take that one first, Mike. We don't see any significant cost. We don't see any significant scheduling differences. It's going to be very, very similar. The major things are to what degree we're going to do the testing. If we can iron that out, it's pretty simple. But one of the things that I'm actually talking about is something like in the 1.0, there was a decibel level of 10 dB. It was a low, and it goes up to a certain decibel level, and you can only increment by 10 dB. And nobody knew on that piece of paper that when you sit down at a voting system and it's at that level, you can't hear it. And because of the restrictions of going up 10 dB, that looks great on paper, but you've got to push the button on every voting system that has been tested to that standard 10 times before you can actually hear it. So it looks good on paper, but when you go out and start testing this stuff, you may find things of that nature that we're going to have to make a decision on.
Yep, thank you. So just to kind of give a little history to this with regard to the concerns from election officials comparing 2.0 to 1.0, I just, and Jack and I were both around back at this time frame. The time period for VVSG 1.0 being implemented coincided with the timing of the EAC taking over the certification program from NACID, which was late 2007. The program was loosely organized at that time. And I think since then, with the EAC, we have seen major restructuring of the conduct of a certification project, which at times led to significant stretching of timelines. It was not uncommon to see an initial certification, of which they all were in the first couple of years of EAC taking over in 2007. But those certifications could take anywhere from 9 months to 18 months. So it was definitely a very significant involvement. This was a learning period for every stakeholder involved, the EAC, the VSTLs, and the manufacturers, which led to concerns from various parties, including state officials. The processes and procedures now in place, as well as the manufacturers, at least the ones that have come in and have a certified system already, the understanding of what is expected, I believe, lead to a more streamlined certification process. The challenge for new manufacturers will be to come in the door understanding a compliance industry is different than a commercial industry and what that entails. With our SLPs and test methods in place, as well as our knowledge from working with the EAC these past 14 years or so, we feel prepared to assist new manufacturers in their transition to this compliance industry. We anticipate that a well-prepared manufacturer with a production-ready system could get through an initial VVSG 2.0 certification within a 4 to 6 month time frame. At this time, SLI feels that our team meets the skill set required for VVSG 2.0 testing. Therefore, we don't feel that there's any financial burden on us in this regard. We believe that we have all the tools needed to complete a VVSG 2.0 test campaign. And SLI, we continually strive to improve our efficiencies and our team's knowledge and skill set. So we invest accordingly on an ongoing basis. And we do not feel that there's anything specific to 2.0 that will cause a financial burden on our lab or our company.
So just to follow up, thank you for that. As a follow up, do you think that component testing, if there was a couple of manufacturers that brought in components for testing to 2.0, would that sort of streamline or make the process for an entire voting system, more efficient? You would think so, but I want to ask the question.
So your question is, if a particular manufacturer brought in their system with one or more components applicable to the VVSG 2.0?
Right. And would that sort of streamline that initial testing that you talked about with the first system?
I guess it would be dependent on what it is that they're bringing in with relation to the rest of the system. So if it's the only thing being tested, it could streamline it. But if they're bringing in a system that has multiple modifications, that some are going to be 1.0 related and others are 2.0, then it has a potential to create a lack of streamlining, because you're still going to have to address 1.0 implementations alongside 2.0 implementations. So it's going to be really dependent on what those changes are and how widespread they are over that voting system.
I agree with Mike, and I also like to take it like a step further. If you're bringing in just a component, say a PCOS, precinct counting device, we could do just the precinct counting device using 1.0 EMS to load it and a 1.0 EMS to report it, but we could test just that component to 2.0. But when you start intermingling an EMS with that is a 1.0 system, but you're going to make some changes to the EMS that are 2.0 compliant, that's where it gets kind of messy.
So I guess that's something that you'll be working with our team on now, I'm assuming. Okay.
Yeah, I would envision that, we're definitely going to have some pretty significant coordination with EAC whenever a manufacturer comes in, really kind of laying it out, looking at the architecture of the system, seeing what's being implemented and how does that impact 1.0 functionality versus 2.0 functionality, kind of like what Jack was just saying. So there's definitely going to be significant involvement, I think, with all the stakeholders when we get to a project like that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Vice Chair Hicks. I think we got some time for another round if you had any more questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple of quick ones. We heard from the first panel that they are gearing up for 2.0, but not necessarily going to be implementing systems before the 2024 election, till after that. My fear is that all the manufacturers, and we heard from 9 of them today, going to have systems certified at the same time if they look towards after the next presidential election. How prepared are you in your 2 companies to be able to, if each company just puts out one system, would you be able to certify all those 9 systems at one time? Or would you have to gear up and hire, I guess, more folks to help with that?
We currently do multiple systems from multiple manufacturers simultaneously, and I don't see 2.0 having any effect on that. I think currently we have 5 systems going at the same time. So I would imagine it stays the same with 2.0. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Hicks?
Yes.
Commissioner Hicks, with the SLI compliance, we are one division within a larger company called Gaming Labs International. In our current environment here in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, our building here alone houses an additional 70 test engineers, in addition to what we have as our core staff. GLI as a company has made the commitment that we would have whatever resources needed whenever they were needed. And as a result of that, the last couple of years, we have been bringing in GLI personnel to do cross-training so that they're up to speed on voting system testing. So we feel that any crunch provided by VVSG 2.0 will be able to handle with the use of additional resources from our parent company.
Commissioner McCormick.
Thank you, Commissioner Hicks. I'd like to ask the labs that if we modified our manual to allow for pen testing from, say, Idaho Labs, will that decrease the cost and timeline for testing and certification?
I think it would decrease the time that we physically have the system in certification, but the testing that's going to have to be done by the Idaho lab needs to be added to the time of total test. So basically, whether they do it or we do it, somebody's going to have to do it. If it can be done in parallel instead of in our test campaign, you might can gain that amount of time, but I don't see it saving any significant amount of time.
Right. And I think the problem right now, well, not the problem, but the way the program is set up right now, the penetration testing is going to be occurring during the same time period of the TRR, the test readiness review, which is technically prior to a certification project occurring. So as far as the certification project itself, I don't know that it impacts it because the penetration testing itself is supposed to be done prior to the project kicking off. So it doesn't cut down timelines, and I don't know if it would potentially prolong it due to the fact that if Idaho National Labs takes any significant amount of time to turn around reports, where when we're doing it internally here, the same people who are going to be doing that penetration testing they're also on our security team. So they would be going right through the penetration testing, and then we would be going right into the project, and they would be doing their normal security testing while the rest of the team's kicking off functional and doc review and source code and all that stuff. So I don't know that there's much of a gain from doing it through another lab like that.
Okay, well, I appreciate your views on that. I have another question. What improvements or issues do you see with the proposed life cycle policy? Come on, either one of you can go on that one.
Well, I think it's going to be, the same for us as a lab. I think the onus is really a lot more on the voting manufacturers to be tracking where each one of their components is in the life cycle and when it's going to be sunsetted and how they're going to address that. As far as a lab, we will be checking that ourselves here, but with the expectation that, the manufacturer coming in has that addressed already.
Okay, Jack, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I concur with Mike, but realistically to a laboratory, it doesn't matter if you sunset it or not. That just means we won't be testing a sunsetted standard in the EAC program. But I can remember working on the 1990 standards well into the 2000s, and there was already been a 2002 VSS. Then they had come out with the 1.1. We were still testing the 1990 standards for some people. So it really doesn't affect the labs that much on the life cycle part. That's just what's going to be included in an EAC test campaign. The labs will probably still be doing some testing for somebody to the old standards.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Hovland?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. Mr. Cobb, you just hit on something, that I always think about, which is obviously the voluntary voting system guidelines are voluntary, and we've seen a number of states use them in different ways. In the last panel, we hit on a little bit about the costs associated with state campaigns, either in addition to or separate from the AC, but we also heard that there is a certain amount of duplication. Can you give us any perspective, and actually this will be for both of you, but thinking about both what you see in the difference between EAC campaigns and state campaigns, particularly in light of Mr. Santos, your commentary about the program maturing and people being more familiar with the process at this point.
So,
Santos, if you want to start, that'd be great.
Sure. Let's see, I lost my train of thought for a second there. So with regard to streamlining, I think, we have encouraged manufacturers to reach out to states that they believe that they're going to be selling into and seeing if they have any specific, local requirements to their state. And if they do, if it's at all possible to encourage them to work with us during an EAC certification project to incorporate the testing of those requirements and then get them out of the way all in one fell swoop. If it's something that is statutory, like Mr. Smith commented on earlier in the first panel, it's still conceivable that, we could take those requirements, depending on what they are, and do a run through of them during an EAC certification project to verify that they're being met. And then at least that way, when a vendor went to a state that requires their own testing to be done, that they could have a pretty good feeling that that requirement's being met already, and it should cut down the time frame and cost of getting certified by that state. So I think there's a number of ways that things can be streamlined, through an EAC project. And I know I've already dumped a couple of things on EAC as far as like the known vulnerability database and the references, but maybe EAC can also at least foster some dialogue with various states to see if there's something that can be done through EAC projects as a norm to kind of streamline things and minimize the cost for the voting manufacturers.
And to add to that, there is some duplication, but a lot of the stuff, well, Mike and I both have worked in Pennsylvania and Virginia, and a lot of the stuff that we do in the certification there, it's specifically for the Commonwealth of Virginia or of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a strange straight party rule for a DRE. And in a federal campaign, we can test that, exercise that straight party to see if it works for Pennsylvania. But it would have to be upon a request of the manufacturer, and we just add it to the report. But you're still going to have to go through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's certification. And like Mr. Smith was saying, that a lot of these states require that. There are states that have their own labs, like New York. Florida has their own lab. Then again, you've got somebody like Georgia that just says, you go to a lab and have them exercise this requirement. Like, I think the last one we did for Georgia, they wanted to make sure that they could exercise 125 candidates in a single race. They wanted that done by the lab. And we had already certified the system in the EAC world, and we had done a volume and stress, but they wanted to see a specific election that is Georgia specific that had 126 candidates in it exercise. So I don't really think there's much we can do to get rid of the duplication. But I mean, we can always try some of the things like Mike was talking about. I'm all game for trying to incorporate as much in the federal campaign as we can. And maybe that'll answer some of the state's questions, and maybe the state will start knowing that we have done some of these things, and that'll alleviate some duplication on the back end.
Right. Can I just add one more thing to that? And it's kind of reference to what Jack just said about in Pennsylvania. They used to have, they actually kind of did away with it last year, but they used to have the Pennsylvania straight party voting method. And at one time, we had 4 different voting manufacturers go in while that method was still in place. None of the 4 passed the Pennsylvania certification testing the first time through. And what that resulted in was that each one of them had to go through and do an EAC certificate, because Pennsylvania also requires EAC certification. So when we hit problems testing that on each manufacturer had to go back through, make the fix, get EAC certified, and then go back and do testing with Pennsylvania again. In that situation, I think 3 out of the 4 opted to have us do the EAC cert. So that way we actually did Pennsylvania testing at the same time, the second time through, and they got them through. But I think it still kind of goes back and touches on, even if it has to be done in the jurisdiction, the jurisdiction can always come to the VSTL that's doing the EAC cert and say, this is what we're looking for. And then it's up to the manufacturer if they're willing, to pay an extra 20 hours or whatever for the VSTL to run through and verify whatever that feature is during the EAC cert, as opposed to taking the risk of not doing it there, going through, finding out that they have a problem. Now they have to go do another EAC cert and go back to the jurisdiction. So I think there's gain there to be had. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Chairman Palmer.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. I want to thank the panelists from our Vistos for joining us. Thank you very much. Thank you for your work. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner McCormick, I believe, for the 3rd panel.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer. Feedback from election officials is a vital component for this process. Our final panel today includes participants who can also provide critical insight on the need for VVSG 2.0 compliant systems nationally, the impact costs will have on jurisdictions, and the need for funding assistance. I'm pleased to be joined today by Tim Mattice, Executive Director for the National Association of Election Officials, also known as Election Center, and Michelle Tassinari, Massachusetts Director of Elections and President of the National Association of State Election Directors Executive Board. And welcome to both of you. And I'll start with the first question for both of you. What feedback have you heard from the members of the Election Center and NASED on their need for VVSG 2.0 compliance systems? Start with Michelle.
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. It's delighted to be here and participate on behalf of the National Association of State Election Directors. I'm proud to represent our membership, which has the state election directors in all 50 states, the DC, and 5 US territories to talk about the implementation of VVSG 2.0. And I'm also happy to be the only election official on here, being able to provide you directly with information. So as you know, NASED has had some pretty vocal criticism of the VVSG 2.0 in the process, as well as just voting system standards generally. And we have been regularly discussing the VVSG certification, the procurement of voting equipment. It's definitely a topic that we discuss on a fairly regular basis. And our members are very active in the TGDC, the Standards Board, the Board of Advisors. In anticipation of this panel, what we did was actually survey our membership to see if they had any other additional thoughts to offer for us. So while the VVSG that was passed in February doesn't look exactly what we had expected or what we had hoped for, we are certainly happy to see forward progress. When we certainly appreciate the EAC's commitment to continuing that progress as we move forward. But we know that the approval by the commissioner is just the first step in the process. There's so much more that actually has to happen before there are systems that are available for any of the election officials to be able to purchase. And the first V in VVSG, as Commissioner Hovland had pointed out, was voluntary. And so there are, as the manufacturers and the VISTLs have said, there are states that have their own certification process, which is included here in Massachusetts. So some states may have to update those procedures before they're able to even implement any 2.0 systems to be evaluated. So we've been waiting a long time for 2.0, as you know. After the Help America Vote Act passed in 2002, many of our election officials purchased new equipment that met the original VVSG standards. And if that was the lifespan, as the manufacturers have said, is between 10 to 15 years, we were already looking for new equipment in 2013, 2014. So the lifespan, is obviously a concern because many people have been unable to wait for new equipment. So they have bought recently new equipment, but it's still only on the 1.0 standards. NASED had established in a VVSG committee in 2013 when the EAC didn't have a quorum. We didn't want the forward progress to stop. So when the EAC was reconstituted in 2015, we were very excited that the new VVSG would be coming soon. Unfortunately, that soon was 6 years ago. So many of our people have been waiting for a long time to get new equipment. And in that intervening period, election systems were designated as critical infrastructure, which adds a whole nother layer of security and criticism to what systems we're using and what we can and cannot do with those. So we have this focus on security that has now kind of been elevated since that designation as a critical infrastructure. So for many election officials, this designation certainly accelerated the need to move to a new system that had a paper record. As you know, with the original HAVA, there were many places out there that went to a DRE, some with a paper backup, some without paper. So in the last 2 years alone, 3 states successfully moved from full paperless voting systems to ones that create a paper record, but they couldn't wait for the 2.0 standards. So a number of states are already in the process of replacing tabulators because they can't wait for the 2.0. One of the concerns that we obviously have here is that we have places that, because of the federal census, are going to increase the number of precincts they have, which also increases the number of tabulators they need. And now they're going to be buying equipment. If they can't get the original equipment that they were using, they might have to buy all new equipment still with the 1.0 standards. There's 2 things to think about as we go through this process. One is a funding issue. So election officials are kind of caught in between things. So here in Massachusetts, we are not the ones who are buying the equipment, it's the cities and towns. But in order for the cities and towns to do that, it takes a long time to get funding. And they're often stuck between local appropriators, and whether there is federal funding that is available that we would be able to pass through for them. So that's something that it's a time frame for them to be able to get the funding to be able to get equipment. So once there is, and then there is also the issue of the timing for the equipment itself to be available. The systems need to pass state certification, but once it does, they're not going to just be waiting on for us to be able to buy them. They're still going to have to be manufactured. And again, we've heard about some of the supply chain issues, which is going to delay that manufacturing availability for many of us. So it's still going to take a long time for those to get actually on the streets and into the polling locations. And then the second issue that our membership is concerned about, and we've heard that was echoed by the voting system vendors, is the need to continue to support the 1.0 certified systems. The security patches and de minimis changes need to make sure that they are still being able to go through the EAC, get certified so that we can continue to use them. The new 1.0 machines that some people have bought, including some jurisdictions here in Massachusetts, they have to be maintained until there is a 2.0 system that is available for use and that has sufficient lead time to be able to actually implement it. So we know that the manufacturers, we've heard them here today, that they're really anxious to get started to get everything submitted for a 2.0 standard. We certainly believe that. And we look forward to working with the EAC, the Vistals, and the manufacturers to make sure that new equipment is done as quickly as possible, but also responsibly. So.
Thank you for your perspective, Ms. Tassinari. Mr. Mattice.
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to represent the election center membership, which a large part is local jurisdictions. So obviously the people on the front lines that are going to be putting these new systems in place. And so in conferring with them, based on some of their questions to their vendors, they feel pretty confident that they're at least okay through the end of 2024. And they've had some assurances that the manufacturers will be able to upgrade components of currently fielded EAC systems to the VVSG 2.0 version, while allowing the overall base system to maintain a VVSG 1.0 designation. There are concerns that the greater detail in requirements will result limiting in any kind of capability, the ability to promptly upgrade or provide corrective actions found, and concerns over vendors being able to meet these requirements. Also, the more you customize, limit, and require, the higher the cost will be. Some jurisdictions that have already purchased their new systems based on what was best for their jurisdictions and their voters, they don't quite fully understand if their systems will be able to be updated, and if so, at what cost, knowing that they can't afford to replace the entire systems again. There is a sense that to allow modifications to currently certified systems indefinitely with no changes to the definition of modification is a good thing. And historically, voting machines have about a 15-year shelf life. So not placing qualifications, restrictions on the enhancements will allow the market to decide when these systems should be replaced. As it relates to VVSG 2.0 compliant systems, we should be encouraging vendors to look towards those updated standards to get the local election officials nationwide best-in-class VVSG 2 compliant systems. And finally, on that first question, some believe that the VVSG 2.0 compliant systems will go a long way to quelling the unfounded accusations and beliefs about the security of our voting equipment in the eyes of the voters. So those are our thoughts on the first question, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mattice. Commissioner Hovland, do you have a question?
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. I wanted to go back to the funding issue. Mr. Mattice, I'll start with you here. Obviously, as Ms. Tassinari highlighted, in most states across the country, the official responsible for purchasing election equipment is at the local level. I was wondering what you've heard from your members about concerns regarding funding as they look to procure new systems.
Yes, funding definitely is an issue for many states and localities. Counties and locals in some states seem to be the last on the list when it comes to updating equipment and elections in general. Trying to convince the powers to be that they operate elections year round and not just 2 days a year. Many counties have few sources of revenue and limited ability to increase taxes that fund operations. So in many situations, revenue cannot keep up with increasing wages and inflation. In some states, without the support of the state provided to jurisdictions, many counties would still be using the 15-year-old generation of voting systems. One jurisdiction I spoke to purchased a new system in 2019, and the last time they bought equipment was in 2006 using 100% county money. It would be extremely hard to convince county government to purchase a new system so quickly if they have to pay for the entire cost. Many jurisdictions have already replaced their original HAVA-funded system with new equipment between 2017 and 2021. All new laws passed by some legislators are unfunded, putting the financial burden on the localities. In one situation, decommission of their equipment resulted in a major, almost insurmountable financial obstacle, particularly because the decommissioning occurred close to an election. Jurisdictions, and even large ones, struggle with funding for procurement of new systems. The impact that cost will have on jurisdictions will ultimately hamper the use of improved systems, which demonstrates the need for further assistance to ensure the nation's election process is unsurpassed when it comes to the critical part of the election, that being the tabulation process through certified and improved upon systems. Whether it's voting systems or any other election-related cost, resources always seem to fall short of the requirements necessitated by legislative change. So thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson. Just to follow up on that, Ms. Tassinari, again, you mentioned primarily equipment purchasing is done at the local level. There are a handful of states that purchase at the state level. Can you help just with a little bit of perspective on the kind of costs that people are looking at? I think about, when Congress passed the $380 million of HAVA money in 2018, a lot of people thought about that as possibly being something that could help, at least supplement system replacement. And you look at states like Delaware, who replaced their system. I believe they used all $3 million of their 2018 HAVA funds as part of a $13 million purchase. They, of course, only have 3 counties compared to some of the larger states where you might see $100 to $140 million for a statewide system. Does that sound about right to you as far as some of the costs that people are looking at in larger states, or if you aggregated locality costs?
So I do. I think that the costs are going to vary, and I think what we see here in Massachusetts is a distinction because we do things on a municipal level. So we have 351 cities and towns. We still have some towns that hand count their paper ballots. Our largest jurisdiction, the city of Boston, is obviously the one who's going to buy the most equipment. What we noticed in 2004, 2005, when everyone was replacing the lever machines, what we saw happen was we went through our state certification process of voting equipment. We saw people, our local election officials who were, interested in buying new equipment. We were providing the reimbursement using our HAVA funds. And what we saw was a real challenge in that the city of Boston got a much better price because they were buying many more of them than some of the smaller jurisdictions. So having the ability to have a statewide procurement would probably alleviate that, as well as some of the other issues, meaning we are the ones who print the ballots for state elections. So we're printing different types of ballot styles as opposed to one consistent ballot style. And both manufacturing the maintenance procedures, coming up with the election procedures that go with everything. It's definitely a challenge when you're looking at that, but from a local perspective, the city of Boston bought equipment using HAVA funds that we reimbursed with back in 2004, and now they just bought new equipment again. But again, their pricing is very different than the pricing that they're getting. A place that's only buying 2 tabulators as opposed to 250 of them. So that diversity from a municipal level is a challenge for price wise, the structure of that. And again, in Massachusetts, one of the weird things is we don't have a lot of voting system vendors coming here. We have a quirky little requirement in our law that for our voting in our presidential primary for a particular party committees, and there's a certain way in which it's done, and it's not part of the EAC certification. The vendors that have traditionally had equipment here know to build it in, and then we test that as part of our state certification. We don't require that to be part of the EAC certification, but it's something that we still have to test locally. And when we talk to vendors even now, under 1.0, we're not having them come here to try to sell us equipment because there's not a huge market with the individual cities and towns. As well as that quirkiness makes it so that it's a challenge for us to get equipment no matter what. And the funding, obviously, our local election officials getting the funding, whether it's through HAVA funds or through their local officials, their local appropriating authorities, makes it difficult.
Thank you. Chairman Palmer.
Thank you, Commissioner Hovland. Just listening to your answers to previous questions, I guess my question is there, with all the pressure on localities and some states in procuring new voting systems, some of that's already occurred post-HAVA, is there anything that would sort of incentivize that to happen in a uniform manner? It sounds like there would need to be significant state or federal investment to sort of bring counties along in a more uniform manner. Otherwise, it'll really be about what counties have the need and what states might have some investment to help. Could you comment about what would help bring the counties in a more uniform manner to 2.0?
Well, I think that there's always a desire to make sure that you're up to date with your standards. And I think that they certainly, if there is the ability to get new equipment that was 2.0 certified and that it was available in the timeframes that are necessary, I think therein lies the challenge, is that there's a funding and then there's an availability issue. So when it comes to the timing to get that, again, we have municipal government. They don't necessarily want us picking things for them. They want the ability to be able to pick what works for their municipality. And so, our state law allows them to pick what they want. And so, for us to try to get them up to 2.0, I think there's certainly a desire to. If it's easier to use, it's easier for them to maintain, and easier for their voters to be able to use, they would want to do it. I think the issue would be funding and availability, in that, you don't want to just say, oh, here's money, go get equipment. And we want it by the next election, and that's 2 months away. It's not a feasible thing to be able to just, flip a switch and get new equipment, because there's, a very long lead time for both the testing locally for acceptance testing, and to learn about it, to be able to educate your voters, to get all of that in place and working before an election. You don't want to just jump into it.
Could you comment on that as well?
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit, Don. Were you calling on me?
Yeah, I just wanted to see if you had any comments on that question or insight.
Yeah, I think probably, the major issue here with the majority of local election officials is the issue of the funding. And, I don't know what the answer is. I think I do, but I'm not prepared to offer that opinion, is that they really need to do, especially where there's a lot of enhancements and a lot of changes with VVSG 2.0, they need financial help. And otherwise, compliance and moving people forward in that whole endeavor is going to be a huge challenge.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Michelle. So it looks like we have a few more minutes for questions, Vice Chair Hicks.
Well, I'd say I get one question at least, right?
There you go.
I want to thank both Tim and Michelle for being here, and I want to thank your members for putting on a great election last year. But Tim, have you heard from your members? And Michelle, have you heard from your election director colleagues how the adoption of VVSG 2.0 will affect their plans for upcoming elections and with replacing voting equipment? And Michelle, if you can talk a little bit more about how this will affect your plans in the Bay State as well, that would be welcome. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So we've heard from several states that their laws requiring voting system to be certified to the current standards of the VVSG. So we're in the environment right now where it's physically not possible for those systems that they're currently using to be certified to VVSG 2.0, the most current version of the VVSG. So it definitely puts our states in a difficult position to figure out, are we using compliance systems? Is someone going to challenge it because we're not certified to the current system? Because nothing is certified to the current system. So the states are certainly relying on the fact that the certification of the 1.0 VVSG 1.0 is still a valid federal standard, or emergency use provisions or other solutions to permit use of their 1.0 standards. So as I had previously mentioned, that we had many of our systems, many of our cities and towns got optical scan equipment when they decertified, when after HAVA, and we got rid of the lever machines. And they wanted to replace that with newer equipment. But again, couldn't wait. So now we're still looking at many places that even in the last 2 to 3 years have replaced their old AccuVotes with digital scan equipment. Still have some that are hand counting their paper ballots and are delighted to still be able to do that. But again, the equipment that's out there, many of them purchased it between 2017 and 2020. We just had some places that are buying new equipment now because they just couldn't wait. And again, when I mentioned previously, some of them need to get more tabulators because they require more precincts because of the redistricting process. So they're, if they were using equipment that it's sometimes it's even hard to get that equipment. So trying to figure out the way in which to most efficiently use the funding that they currently have and, using the equipment that they had. So I think one of the things that we heard from the manufacturers is the estimation that the 2.0 systems will be ready for testing in 2024. And the Vistals have gotten the 1.0 testing down pretty smooth. So but they've had 15 years of practice with that. So the question still remains as to how long, once the equipment is submitted to the Vistals for testing, it will take for those 2.0 systems to get certified. So the best case scenario that we're looking at here is, let's say it takes a year for them to get certified. So we're not looking at a 2024 election. What we are actually looking at is a much later time frame. So it looks like the first systems probably at 2025, 2026 might be the earliest at which we'll see stuff. But again, the delays and with the supply chain and getting all of that. And then I think we're going to see, whether we want to or not, there is going to be a demand for new systems, especially if there is any federal funding that's available. So we're going to see a demand, and will there be enough actual equipment to meet those demands for the places that do want new equipment? So I think we're certainly up against a wall when it comes to trying to get new things in, thinking about how we get those things manufactured and then out in there. We certainly don't want the EAC to rush through this process. We also don't want to see any of the 1.0 systems decertified. We do want to see, a responsible process moving forward to get equipment certified, available, and ready for our election officials, so that when it is available for everyone, we'll have the ability for them to actually get it out into the field in a responsible manner as well.
I just want to
Thank you.
clarify that we're not planning on decertifying any of the 1.0 systems outright, just to make sure everybody understands that.
We're all happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Tim?
When the next generation of systems that really is VVSG 2.0 compliant, when it's actually certified and ready for purchase, some of our local jurisdictions are concerned about not being able to upgrade to the new systems while balancing their budgetary situations with replacing recently purchased systems. That's certainly an issue that is repeated over and over with the local jurisdictions. There are many that feel that they're in limbo, given uncertainty about when certification will begin and other timelines, as Michelle has indicated. Once that process begins and if existing systems can be upgraded without glitches. There also exists a dividing line in jurisdictional decision-making as to whether to purchase existing systems or wait for the yet to be built VVSG 2 compliant systems. For some jurisdictions, that means their solution was to seek out a lease for a newer certified system in lieu of purchasing. Their solution required a partnership with the vendors during a request for proposals process and a willingness of vendors to entertain this lease option. Jurisdictions should perhaps evaluate where they are in the VVSG cycle to best determine how long the initial and renewal term should last if they do choose that leasing process. And if they're a couple of years away from needing a new system, you could add a few more years to the initial term to allow for delays in the VVSG 2.0 approval process. The leasing model is something that might be considered as a best practice in this particular environment where those guidelines are in place, but systems are not yet built to those standards. So thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer.
So thank you very much. On behalf of my fellow commissioners, I'd like to thank all the participants today's meeting for their contributions to this important and ongoing discussion about the way forward. This process has brought forth a range of perspectives to add to what the EAC has heard leading up to the vote to approve 2.0 and as we implement it this year. This work will continue. The EAC Technical Guidelines and Development Committee, the TGDC, will meet in October. We're also going to have a public open comment period for the life cycle policy, and we'll gather more input from our advisory boards on how we develop that policy. So we're committed to moving forward on the implementation process for VVSG 2.0. I want to thank everybody again who spoke today in the earlier hearings and the meetings. And thank you for the many people who contributed to getting this to where we are today. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll conclude this hearing. Thank you.